Welcome to Dairy Pod, a podcast series from Dairy Australia. Featuring a range of experts, each episode offers insights into Australia's unique dairy farming conditions, as well as personal experiences and the latest in dairy innovation.
And welcome to another Dairy Australia Farm Business Management webinar discussing tactics for the year ahead. So clearly, challenging climatic conditions prevail, with parts of South Australia and Western Victoria in severe drought having recorded the lowest rainfalls, with many regions are experiencing dry conditions, while areas in northern New South Wales have experienced the highest rainfall across the same period. As you'd no doubt be aware, many dairy farms across the mid-north coast and Hunter regions were affected by flooding. This included the inundation of water in dairy sheds and farmhouses, with many not being able to milk, including significant loss of livestock, significant loss of fodder, both pasture and conserve feed, loss of fencing, and significant damage to infrastructure. This, combined with the drought, has put significant pressure on feed and water prices and availability across many dairying regions. So clearly, each farm is very different resources, different operations, different goals, and of course, diverse, challenging climatic conditions. Therefore, each farm business operator works out what this means for their farm and what the best course of action or tactics are for their business in the short, medium, and longer term. There's a need to be realistic in terms of what the tactics are and keep in mind the bigger picture or longer-term plan for the business, as well as deal with the here and now. We'll discuss this at length in this webinar. Firstly, though, my background. I'm the Farm Business Program Lead for Dairy Australia. I live with my family in the dairying region of the Shoalhaven, South Coast, New South Wales. I've spent 7 years in extension in and around New South Wales, and for the past 4 years, I now support regional teams with the National Farm Business Performance Program. So today, I'm really pleased to have both Fiona Smith and Tom Farran joining us for this webinar. We work closely with them both across a range of Dairy Australia projects and extension delivery initiatives. They both run their own independent dairy consulting businesses, Fiona based in the West Vic region and Tom in the Murray. Fiona and Tom are deeply immersed in the dairy industry and work closely with farmers every day.
So I'm based up in northern Victoria in the irrigation region. I've been up this way for about 25 years now. Over that time, I've worked as a farm consultant for a fair chunk of it, which involves working directly with farmers to help them on their business decisions as well as the technical part. In addition to that, I also work a lot with farm groups like dairy business groups, run a few programs for Dairy Australia, those sorts of things. The fortunate and unfortunate at the same time point of view, being in northern Victoria, in that 25 years, there's been at least 16 years of those where we've had pretty adverse conditions, whether it's drought, floods, prolonged wet conditions, milk price crashes, and I've been in a unique position for a lot of that I've been able to work directly with farmers around helping them make decisions, but also being able to follow through the financial side, seeing how those decisions play out and over an extended period of time, not just through the event, but how they recover out the other side as well. Just want to acknowledge, it's an Australia-wide event, this one, so it's not focused on any one particular region because there's a big diversity of what's happening out there. So as Greg touched on before, we've got the situation in areas like Southwest Victoria and South Australia that's been incredibly dry for quite some period now, and so those farms are no doubt running out of resources such as fodder and stuff like that, and we're really trying to work out how to get through the shorter term side of it. We've got another scenario playing out, say, in more inland Australia in the southern Murray-Darling Basin, where it's been largely protected to an extent because of the irrigation water that's been available from the previous years. But the dry last 12 months has seen that the resources are starting to run low now. So a lot of farmers are either starting to run into a bit of a tight situation or trying to put steps in place to try and minimise the impact if it does stay dry for another few months. And then, as Greg said, we've got other areas that are dealing with floods or prolonged wet periods. And then we've got a whole heap of regions somewhere in between, like Gippsland, for example, who are no doubt doing it quite tough at the moment. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that one answer we give might not suit where everyone's up to. So we'll be trying to deal with each situation to an extent, but just bear in mind that, we've got farmers and people listening to this that are going to be experiencing things quite differently to each other.
Thank you, Tom, and we do acknowledge those comments from you. Now, Tom, coming into end of financial year, as you've mentioned, it's a very mixed situation across the country. And looking to tactics for the year ahead, firstly, where are the key settings at?
Yeah, so as of about 2 weeks ago, roughly now, there was a fairly widespread rain event in southeastern Australia. Depending on where you are, depending on how much you got. For a lot of people, that's a bit of a relief that there's some moisture there now. But as we know, it's not over. For example, if it's rained in the middle of June, we know that there's not going to be a lot of pasture availability still until well into August. So while that's a slight improvement, it's still a little way to go yet. When I look at things like the long-range weather forecast, and I'm no weather forecaster, but reading through the different notes around it, it's sort of giving me a fairly neutral outlook for a fair chunk of Australia for the next few months. And the biggest driver there is there doesn't seem to be a major driver to influence it. So really can't be sure if it's going to be wetter, drier, or average in that regard. And to be honest, that's pretty common for this time of the year. The forecasts for spring don't normally get more accurate for another month or so yet. The other key things at the moment is the fodder situation. So the fodder and fibre as such, the real lack of fibre in a lot of areas of Australia at the moment, whether you're wanting hay, straw, or even the byproducts that might help extend some of those products out, is in really short supply and doesn't look like it can be replenished until we get a reasonable spring. So that's on a fairly big negative. On the positive side, to an extent, is where the grain situation's at. So if you're looking at cereal grains like wheat, they are quite available. There's believed there's quite good stores out there. Internationally, the markets are relatively okay at the moment. And so there doesn't seem to be a lot of upward pressure on that. In some regions, it's even dropped a little bit in recent times. And so that side's not a big concern, or nowhere near as big a concern as the fodder situation. And that flows into some of the protein meals like canola meal. The price relative to other feeds at the moment is still quite reasonable. The availability, there's still supplies there, but sometimes you might need to wait. So you need to be proactive in those markets. And for the guys that are in the irrigation regions of the Murray-Darling Basin, the southern part of it, we've been tracking at very low inflows for the last few months. So that is a concern, but it's also worth noting that the inflows that you get through sort of February through to June are quite small compared to what you normally get in later winter and spring. So it certainly could turn around, but at this stage, the likely allocations for most systems is that 40 to 100% range. So a big difference there, and a bit of fairly different starting point to where we've been the last few years, where we've nearly started at 100%. So thanks, Joe.
Okay, Tom, appreciate those opening comments on where we see some of the bigger settings. It's a great opportunity at this point to come across to Fiona. And Fiona, what are you hearing from the regions and focusing on with farm business clients?
Thanks, Jen. And I think it does depend, as we've talked about, it depends a little bit on the region. I've just come back from Western Australia, and I think their circumstances are probably a little bit different. I think they're probably enjoying having some pasture in front of them and available to them, but also aware that there may be some fodder coming across the border to the eastern states. So I think even for them, their consideration is around the fodder shortage across Australia and the impact that will have for them for next year. If I think about the clients that I'm dealing with over in Southwest Vic and Gippsland and eastern areas, is around working out what feed reserves they've got available and when that will get them until. As Tom said, for a lot of those regions, they're not going to have any grass until August. That might be early August, it might be late August. So certainly getting their minds around where they can actually get to at the moment. Working out how they can extend those fodder reserves. Monitoring availability of water. So whilst a lot of regions did get pretty good water across the long weekend, with Southwest Vic getting sort of 60 to 120 mils, partly still monitoring that water availability, but also dealing now with some really muddy paddocks that had been, dust bowls quickly turning to mud. Managing cash flow. I think most farmers at the moment will be in a position where they're monitoring cash flow pretty regularly around fodder and milk prices, and then making sure that they're monitoring how healthy the pasture is that's coming up, because there's certainly been a lot of question from those farmers about what is actually going to germinate, of what has germinated, how healthy is that actually looking. So they're the key things at the moment, Jane.
Okay, and we appreciate those reflections. And Tom, if I can come to you now. So what does that look like for the farm businesses in your region who might be in a different position?
Yeah, so there is it's variable out there. So there's a lot of farms in very different circumstances. So, and also we talk about the irrigation region, but there's different systems in amongst those, and that's making a big difference at the moment. So if I look at the farmers in the Murray Zone 7 in Victoria, their water prices are already quite high. It has been for a while now, whereas in the Goulburn Zone, the water price was always higher than what people would like it to be. It's only about half the price of where the Murray system's sitting at. There's also some farms, for example, I've dealt with a few lately that are fairly new to the industry, didn't have a lot of resources behind them. They're already hitting the big issues around the fodder situation, trying to work out how to deal with those, and very similar to what Fiona was saying in that regard. Whereas I've also got a number of farms that are going okay at the moment. They're just like the Western Australia farms that Fiona mentioned, where they're just trying to work out what they can do to try and minimise any impact that might come from if it does stay dry and they get lower irrigation outlooks and don't have the hay reserves refilling. And so they're looking at things like how can they extend those fibre sources. So most of them are focusing on the basics, like really good pasture management can make a big difference to how much grass they can consume, hence not have to buy in. And a grain, so grain's available. So can they push the grain a little harder to try and extend that fodder reserve? And just as we're rapidly closing on the end of the irrigation trading season, also, do they have enough water aside for next year? So could they do anything in that space around forward purchases or carryover water and those sorts of things? And so a lot of planning and budgeting is also going in at the moment, running a few different scenarios, but we'll get into more of that stuff in a little while.
And Tom, we really appreciate you bringing that additional context to today's discussions. Now, Fiona, with all of that in mind, what's your thinking to optimise individual businesses' potential from where they would find themselves currently sitting?
I think, Jane, there's, as we would always say in any sort of business planning, there's a lot of consideration for, I suppose, short term, the medium term and the long term. There are a lot of people at the moment that are very focused on the short term, which is very understandable. A lot of people trying to work out at the moment how they're actually going to get any form of fibre source, and whether it's actually viable for them to get that fibre source, given that a fair portion of that at the moment is coming from the northern states, Queensland, New South Wales, very high freight costs. For anything that does eventuate to come across from Western Australia will also have very high costs. So I think the short term is very much around making sure that they're making those decisions, but not impacting what their medium-term decisions are going to be for the impact on the farm, and then also not impacting what's going to happen in the long term, which I know Tom has seen a lot of circumstances over his 16 years where people have made decisions, and I think sometimes different decisions have different long-term impacts for those businesses, don't they, Tom?
Yeah. So I really appreciate the point you made that how important think about the long term is for these businesses. So the decisions they make now, what impact they have later, but also acknowledging just how difficult that can be at the time when you're really limited on resources and you're trying to survive. So I acknowledge some of the things I'm going to say are a bit difficult to actually implement, but just experiencing a lot of farms going through adversity for periods of time. Some of the kind of lessons I've learned, I suppose you'd like to call it, is that things like culling cows, for example, your milking herd, I've found that the farms that are culled quite hard in that area, and by hard I mean sort of over 20%, as a rough rule, the recovery has been a lot tougher out the other side. So what might have helped them survive a bit, it's prolonged how long it's taken the business to get back to a stable position again, a profitable position. Another couple of key things I always find is that undergrown heifers, because often we, for the first port of calls, to feed the milk as well, and then we'll try and deal with the heifers. If they come in quite undergrown, they rarely ever recover and become a profitable animal for you. So really got to think about, if you're keeping them, you need to be feeding them well. The impact that letting the cows slip in condition too much can have. So maintaining herd health and fertility is absolutely vital to make sure the issues you're dealing with now don't become long-term issues. The importance of just getting the basics right never goes away. So pasture management is an easy win for a lot of people. So the importance of that to try and help grow as much to limit the exposure. And also on that one, the coming out of when you do get some grass, but you don't have a lot, it's very tempting and almost seems necessary to try and get on there and start grazing straight away to relieve the pressure. Unfortunately, that'll mean you'll end up growing less feed. And so it has a snowball effect. The other one is a little bit around cutting costs. So as businesses struggle, cutting costs is an obvious thing to do. Just need to be careful which areas you're doing it in, because sometimes cutting the cost, a particular cost might cut your income by even more than what the cost is actually saved or have that long-term impact on you. So just need to be careful around that. And the other one is around those trigger points. So having a plan in place that clearly outlines some trigger points of when action will need to be taken if things have or haven't happened by that stage. So I might hand over to Greg a little bit on this one as well to see what he's thinking for his region.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And look, certainly wet conditions prevail around here on the south coast of New South Wales. Regarding the flooding, though, the New South Wales Dairy Emergency Leadership Group continues to prioritise immediate response needs such as assisting to allocating and sourcing of fodder, generator support for those farms with limited power, some milking machine tech support, vet assistance, cow parking, as well as mental health support and communications to impacted farmers. Please reach out if you've not had contact or received support yet as we move into the next phase.
Okay, and thank you to your all really important reflections there from experiences. So we might move on now, Fiona, and talk about what, in your view, is the biggest issue that farm businesses are grappling with at the minute from a cash flow perspective.
And I think, Jane, again, this is a bit hard to be sort of all-encompassing because different farms will be facing different issues at the moment. Some will have the biggest issue that they're actually struggling to find a fibre source. So they've sort of exhausted all their resources of people to contact. For some, it will be the actual ability to have cash flow to buy fibre and feeds. So some are certainly dealing with that circumstance. Some will still be dealing with a lack of stock water, which is obviously problematic. And I think there'll certainly be a number of people that are having these conversations around should we be culling animals and the impact that then has into the future.
Okay, and now maybe for those watching, to expand on cash flow and financial management, Fiona, what are the specific go-to tools, management tools that you're using with farm businesses that can help underpin some of the decision processes?
I think now's a really critical time to be looking at this. Whilst a lot will be looking at their cash position at the moment, I think one of the first places is to make sure you're having regular conversations with your bank and also with your suppliers. I know a lot of farmers are needing to reach out to suppliers. Much better to have regular communication with them about where you're sitting from a cash flow perspective, to have early conversations, making sure you're getting income estimates. So people should be pretty aware of where their milk price is likely to sit. Whilst it might still move a bit, it may not. Get income estimates, possibly reach out to a number of processors for that to make sure that you've got the best income estimate for what fits your business and your supply curve. Running a few scenarios. We generally say run a scenario for a normal year. I don't think any of us know really what a normal year is anymore in each of these regions. Running it for what you think is a normal year on your farm, plus also looking at a circumstance where you may have another tough year to see what impact that has on your cash flow. And I think, Jane, it's just about continuing to budget. Feed budgets, water budgets, cash flow budgets. Sometimes they're really scary, but I think the more informed you can be, and the more comfortable you can get with what your cash flow is going to be, hopefully the easier it is, not that it's easier, the better position you're in to make those decisions moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So getting that information that can help underpin the decisions can be helpful is what I've taken away there. Now, Tom, you mentioned at the start of our session about some of the challenges that you've experienced through your career. So from your own experiences, reflecting on management decisions during challenging times. What's your advice?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So very important just to remind everyone that everyone's different. They're all in different circumstances, different resources, different stages of their farming career and things like that. And so there's never one size fits all answer. So everyone's got to create their own individual plan. And when they're doing it, it's very important to consider the long term as well as just the short term. I know a lot of people will be more in that survival mode, but we've just got to make sure that those decisions being made now don't have a long term negative impact as much as you can. Another concept I just wanted to bring up is around what I'd call the sunk cost fallacy. And so a lot of the time this hampers decision making. And so, for example, people are thinking about their young stock we've been talking about, should I sell some or not? A lot of them going, oh, geez, they're not worth much at the moment. I've spent all this money trying to get them to this point and I'm going to sell them for less than I made. The reality is we can't do anything to go back in time and change that. We've just got to make the decision from where we are today. What is our best decision for that animal? Do we keep spending a lot of money on her to get her through, or are we better off without her because she'll cost more than maybe it's worth the other end? So we need to just draw that line in the sand saying we can't change the past. We've got to deal with what's in front of us today and make the best decision going forward and not let the past hamper that decision. The other key one, and I realise this is a nice fancy word to say, but the trigger point part of a plan is quite important. What I mean by that is we've just got to put some sort of deadline type thing in there where certain things happen and we've got to make certain decisions. So this is going to be different for everyone, but a couple examples might be we put in saying we haven't had so much rain by this sort of date, then this is what I'm going to go and do instead. So whether it's I might have to offload some cows, or I will have to make that decision to order that truckload of hay if we can find it, and those sorts of things. Also, as we go later into the year, because as we've made quite clear that this situation could improve rapidly with a good spring. If it's a bust as such, spring-wise, then there'll be a whole range of new decisions that need to come in. So an example of a trigger point might be, if on my farm, if I haven't conserved this much tonne, or the fodder price is above this when I need to go and buy it, then these are the decisions I'm going to have to implement as a result. The other one I always find is that early action is very important. So if you might put it around each way bet. So these are the farms that aren't doing it as tough at the moment, but are getting concerned going forward. Is there some things today that you can try and put into action right now that might help that situation later on? So an example for an irrigation farmer is, with a couple of days left of water trading, do I actually secure some more carryover water now to try and give me that bit more of that buffer in there as well? Just like to acknowledge that making some of these decisions are really hard and tough. They're not easy to do. But the general experience is that if you forego these hard decisions, it actually gets harder in the long run as a result. And so it can be really difficult to make these decisions, but by not making these decisions, not putting a plan in place, generally the problem actually gets worse, not better for most people. Occasionally things change for the better, but unfortunately we've got no guarantee of that. And so it's a little bit of analogy most people have probably heard around this is what they call the frog in the hot water situation. That's why I'm talking about these trigger points are so important. And the story goes there, I don't know which type of researcher decided this was a good idea, but they've decided they'll put a frog in some cold water, put it in the pot on the stove, heat the water up, and they watch the frog slowly boiled to death without ever taking any action. Whereas when they pre-boiled the water and went to put the frog in there, it jumped straight out. And so it's just a little bit saying we just need to be aware that we're not that frog in that water slowly boiling and not actually doing anything about it. And the final point I want to make on there is that, unfortunately, we never, ever have all the information we need to make the perfect decision when we need it. And so if we try and wait for all the information to make these decisions, often we've missed we've left it too late and we've already suffered some of the consequences. So unfortunately, we've got to try and make the decisions with the information we have on time, not delay them with the hope we're going to get more information coming.
Appreciate that, Tom. Some great advice born from your experiences. Now, Greg, following on from that, you also wanted to say that it's vital that people reach out for support or assistance. So coming over to you, where can they go?
Yeah, thanks, Joan. And look, there is a range of support tools and resources currently available. The first one to signpost is Dairy Australia has 8 regional teams across Australia that can provide support. So check the Dairy Australia website for contact details, or they can also be found inside the back few pages of every dairy farmer magazine. The other one to signpost is, of course, the Rural Financial Counselling Service. The RFCS is an ongoing Australian government program, provides free and independent financial counselling to eligible farmers experiencing or at risk of financial hardship. The other one, state governments. State governments have a range of support and resources available. Often if you search drought and dry seasonal support, you'll find something, especially the AgVic one-to-one advisory service, which is currently available. Now, websites. Dairy Australia's website is great. There is a couple of landing pages dedicated to dry conditions, droughts, or managing in wet conditions. They have a range of information resources which can help prepare and manage the impacts of dry conditions, drought, and managing in the wet. Also on the Dairy Australia website, the Farm Business Snapshot. It's more of an entry-level tool which provides an analysis of the historical performance of a dairy business, helping users to better understand their production costs and overall profitability. Also in there is the Dairy Cash Budgeting tool. It can help plan cash flow accuracy using an easy-to-navigate spreadsheet available for download. Additionally, Dairy Base, which many of you might have heard of already, it's like the Farm Business Snapshot. It's an online tool that can help dairy farmers and their advisors manage, measure and compare farm business performance, though at a much more detailed level. Extension is what Dairy Australia does well. There's a range of upcoming extension opportunities, both face-to-face and online. I encourage everyone to check the Dairy Australia events calendar, your RDP newsletter, or social media for details. The last one, but most importantly, I think, Jane, just remember in these challenging conditions, fatigue and burnout are the reality. They can easily result from the extreme high levels of stress and stress that goes on for a prolonged period. Understanding fatigue, burnout and stress helps you act sooner and protect your mental health.
And Fiona, as we've discussed, you're interacting with farm businesses on a daily basis. So what are some of the messages that you might like to close on today?
I think, Jane, the key ones that I'm talking to farmers about is around those trigger points that we've discussed. So being really clear about what their trigger points are. And we certainly don't want to get to a position where we're just not making any decisions. So having trigger points in place to make decisions in the business, utilise the resources that are available, and actually utilise other farmers to have conversations, not just to find out what they're doing, but to support each other. And I think another big one I say is for the ones that aren't directly involved in the farming enterprise is just to be aware of different triggers. So if your partner asks you to come and feed, cows on the support block that they can do all by themselves and they've always done by themselves, they're generally not asking you to help feed the animals. They're generally just asking you to come along so they've got company. They might talk to you, they might not. It's well worth going along so that you can give them that support as part of the process.
Important closing comment there. Now, Tom, looking out to the next 12 months, so what's front of mind in your view?
Yeah, so as I've said quite a few times, everyone's different circumstances, different resources. So they need to assess the situation for themselves, develop a plan. When I say for themselves, that should ideally be with the help of other people, but unique to their own situation. So develop that plan, have a good idea of what impact that's going to have. So that's your budgeting, as like your cash flow budgeting, influenced by or informed by your feed, water, milk type budgets as well. Talk about those trigger points. The other key one is always just we sometimes get lost in some of all what's happening and all the stress around it, but just to remember the focus on the basics is still very important, whether it's pasture management, whether how you're looking after the cows, how you're looking after your staff, all those sorts of things. And just to re-emphasize what the other two have just mentioned, is that looking after yourself is incredibly important in this situation, not just for your own well-being, but it actually will, it's really difficult to make good decisions for your business if you get into a poor mental area. And I'm also aware that there's quite a few service provider type people listening in today as well. And so that message applies for them as well. It is, yes, it takes a fair big burden, sometimes seeing a lot of stressed farmers in poor situations day in, day out. But by letting yourself come unstuck or get fatigued and get too stressed and everything else like that, it's hard to actually help them very well either. So very important to try and look after yourself during these times, not only for your own well-being, but for the quality of your decision-making and stuff as well.
Thank you, Tom. And Greg, coming to you for your final message from the discussion today.
Please look after yourself and look out for those around you. There's a range of resources available to support people and health. Make sure you're aware of these.
Thank you, Greg. And that brings us to the end of our session today. Thanks to all of you who have joined us. A big thank you to our guests today for sharing their insights.
Thank you for joining today's Dairy Pod episode. We hope you found it enjoyable and insightful. For more information, check out the episode notes. You can stay up to date by following Dairy Pod on your favourite podcast platform. To get in touch, visit dairyaustralia.com.au. Until next time, take care.